Gun barrel's broken again.
An enormous wall of
Culture.
coming towards us.
Just pennies. What else do I need?
James Bond is having another identity crisis. After 15 years, 5 movies, several on-set injuries, and ongoing threats to vacate the world-famous role, Daniel Craig officially hung up his 00 number in 2021. The search for his replacement has taken 5 years just to get off the ground. It's kind of understandable. Daniel Craig will be a tough act to follow.
I'm happy for you, but I'm sad for us, because genuinely, you have been a fantastic Bond. I mean, so good.
As the 6th actor to play the British super spy, Craig's tenure was franchise-shattering. He was the face of a massive creative redirection for the series, the likes of which we had not seen in 44 years. Craig's series of films represented a true evolution for the character. His Bond is more grounded, more psychologically complex. Perhaps for the first time, James Bond was a human being, for better or worse. Without Daniel Craig, the James Bond franchise faces an uncertain future. Rumors and fan speculation seem to be hovering around actors like Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Callum Turner, Jacob Elordi, and every day it seems like another option gets added to the pile. Like I just heard about Tom Francis yesterday. Bond number 26 has a tentative 2028 release date, so I have to imagine we'll know soon. The search for a new star aside, there's another reason why this franchise has a big question mark hanging over it right now. For 63 years, the James Bond movies were a family affair. Producers Albert Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman were responsible for bringing the British super spy to the screen. But after Broccoli's death in the mid-90s, his daughter Barbara and his stepson Michael G. Wilson were at the reins. As of 2025, that era is over. The series' longtime distributors, United Artists, were subsumed by MGM in the early 80s. So when Amazon purchased MGM in 2022, they also bought the distribution rights for all future Bond movies. As of 2025, Amazon has also effectively bought out the longtime producers, Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson. That effectively ended the Broccoli family's decades-long total creative control over all things Bond. Agent 007 is now officially Amazon IP. So it begs the question, what will they do with it? Will they continue as before, making epic, action-packed theatrical releases every few years? Will they adapt Bond for all kinds of mediums, film, TV, stage, creating an overarching Bond multiverse? That idea makes my inflammation act up. However, if they decide to do a 50s-60s period piece that goes back to the original Fleming novels, I wouldn't be outraged. In fact, let me pitch myself. Hi. My name is Joe Shatina. I'm a screenwriter and playwright. I even got a degree in it. It was expensive. But frankly, I don't know if they'll do a period piece for the simple fact that it might hit a little too close to the age-old question. Hasn't the world moved on from James Bond? This is a world where the British Empire is not exactly what it once was. A world where super spies are presumably stationed at computers instead of boots-on-the-ground stealth fighters in pursuit of the world's biggest baddies. Of course, I mean that in both senses of the word. The modern world is one in which Bond's unflinching, unwavering devotion to his, her, or their Majesty's Secret Service would make him feel even more like an, imperialist automaton than ever before. So there are a lot of questions the franchise has to answer before it can move forward. Who will play him? What will a shift in series ownership do to the series' quality? Where does he fit within modern-day geopolitics? And is James Bond too much of a Cold War relic of mid-century British exceptionalism to fit into a world that has moved on? These are questions the Bond series has never had to answer in its entire 64-year history, except literally every time they make a new one. And to its credit, this is a franchise that has always managed to navigate the changing times flawlessly, without ever embarrassing itself or straining for cultural relevance. You see, in the 70s, I don't know any other way to put this, James Bond got fucking weird. So I know I said we were going to talk about the 70s, but to talk about the 70s, we really have to talk about the 60s first. And to talk about the 60s, we actually have to talk about the 50s, so let's start in the 40s. After World War II ends, we start to see unprecedented international collaboration. NATO and the United Nations are formed in the aftermath. Despite their joint effort in fighting Nazi Germany, the uneasy alliance between the so-called Allied forces, the US, the UK, China, and the Soviet Union, rapidly deteriorates. Without a common enemy, they turn on each other. East versus West. Communism versus capitalism. Eastern prudence and collectivism versus Western decadence and individualism. We also see the formation of several government agencies devoted to overseas operations, namely the American CIA, the Russian KGB, and a scaling up of the pre-existing British counterintelligence agency MI6. By the 1950s, we've entered an age of global espionage, covert ops, and political maneuverings that's relatively elusive when you compare it to the clashing of armies on battlefields that marked centuries past.
I'm going to explain to you the system of warning signals that will be used in this country in the event of a nuclear attack.
This is the era of the Red Scare, mass communications, the space race, nuclear proliferation. The world is becoming more globalized, with more information and contact flowing between people half the world away. This is terrifying. Our enemy has become amorphous. The Red Menace may already be here. Meanwhile, in Jamaica, former Naval Intelligence Officer Ian Fleming has retired. He's relocated to the Caribbean, where he spends his days smoking copious amounts of cigarettes and writing for the Sunday Times. In his day, he was known as an infamous womanizer, a quintessential British gentleman, and a character of unbridled wit, a man of chivalric nobility. Fleming often said he created his now legendary character of James Bond in a fit of neurotic tension as he contemplated marriage to his one and only wife, Anne Charteris. What a charmer. In his biography, Andrew Lysak contests that it was far more practical and frankly less shitty than that. Fleming married Charteris after she became pregnant, and Fleming took his talents for storytelling and his intimate knowledge of counterintelligence operations to write a story that could potentially provide for their new son, Casper. Fleming spends much of 1952 crafting a fictional alter ego who would live out embellished versions of his own exploits and the exploits of his colleagues in counterintelligence. This man would be cool, brutal, dangerous, while sharing his creator's overindulgence in alcohol, cigarettes, women. Secret agent James Bond, codenamed 007, makes his literary debut in Casino Royale. Published in 1953, Casino Royale follows James Bond, an MI6 agent tasked with bankrupting a criminal financier named Le Chiffre. Le Chiffre is in dire straits with money he embezzled from the Russians. Bond's mission isn't to kill his target. He's meant to beat Le Chiffre in a high-stakes baccarat tournament, as gentlemen do. In the face of his loss, the trash will take itself out and the financier will most likely be killed by his Russian handlers. James Bond is efficient, calculated, armed with a license to kill and a coldness that's rattled by his romance with the book's heroine, fellow agent Vesper Lynd. In some ways, Fleming is just another in a long line of British thriller writers. He is a progeny of John Buchan, writer of The 39 Steps, and a contemporary of John le Carré, writer of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. Both of them were also intelligence officers who then turned to writing espionage stories in their post-military careers. But Fleming and Bond stand apart. Buchan's Richard Hannay is an everyman, and le Carré's spies are distinctly unglamorous, even workmanlike. Now, Fleming's novels are pure escapist fantasy. Dark and brooding, to be sure, but also brimming with exotic locations, beautiful women, and a taste for the finer things in life. Fleming publishes a new James Bond novel every year up until his death in 1964, and 2 books were published posthumously. It's near the end of this run that Bond's fame goes worldwide.
James Bond, 007. Licensed to kill whom he pleases, where he pleases, when he pleases.
Although Dr. No is the sixth book in Ian Fleming's series, producers Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli consider its story of a mysterious Caribbean island and rocket ship sabotage the perfect entry point for a film series. Broccoli and Saltzman's search for the perfect actor to play Bond has them meeting with film legends like Cary Grant and David Niven, who would actually later play James Bond in a 1967 parody film, loosely inspired by Casino Royale. According to Cubby Broccoli, they even inquire about an English actor named Roger Moore. But Moore is tied up with his new series, The Saint, leaving him unavailable to take the role. But let's put a pin in that for now. In the end, they cast a little-known Scottish actor named Sean Connery. They're not initially convinced that he's right for the part. They're convinced by the way he moves, like a panther, as they said later. Connery is cast, and the film enters production in early 1962. Played by Joseph Wiseman, Dr. No is a mysterious supervillain interfering with an American rocket launch. His villainous plot speaks more to the global tensions of the moment than a game of wits in a smoky casino would have. Interestingly, they largely avoid pitting Bond explicitly against the Russians in these early movies. They acknowledge that the Soviets are the enemy, but most of the series' early bad guys are members of Spectre, a powerful super-org who often manipulate the standing tensions between the East and the West, usually for financial gain.
East, west, just points of the compass, each as stupid as the other. I'm a member of Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre.
Dr. No's storyline plays on the anxieties around the space race without naming them. It was made doubly timely when the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred just weeks after its release in the UK. Despite immaculate set design and impressive practical effects, Dr. No was shot mostly on location in Jamaica for a relatively low budget, especially when you compare it to the sequels. Wikipedia lists its overall gross as almost $60 million. That seems pretty deceptive to me. If the number is anywhere close to that, I feel like most of that had to have been made in re-release once it could piggyback off the success of the sequels. Nevertheless, Dr. No is huge. Spy movies existed, but not like this. Before this, spies would invariably show up in war movies and whodunits and some truly awful melodramas where everyday people were suddenly thrown into contact with spies for completely convoluted reasons. Suspense maestro Alfred Hitchcock excelled in the spy genre, particularly in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But his movies were often told from the points of view of accidental heroes, these ordinary people caught up in dangerous international plots. But even in these movies, the spies themselves usually weren't the main event. They were often the villains, saboteurs working for enemy nations.
Bond. James Bond.
From the moment James Bond purrs his trademark phrase, "Daddy had us by the throat," Bond is no side dish. He is the focal character. We are right there beside him as he dashes through sleek and exquisitely designed villains' lairs, beds the most beautiful women, and sports the status symbols of the day. If Bond were just an action hero, he wouldn't have had such longevity. He was a lifestyle, literally. Luxury brands clamored for inclusion in Bond's world of stylish intrigue. The aesthetics of Bond, with Ken Adams' ingenious set designs, Maurice Bender's innovative title designs, and the endless stream of clever gadgetry, romantic liaisons, and elegant vices inspire an entirely new subgenre of spy film. With each new film, the Bond team creates, then perfects, then coasts on the same template for almost 4 decades. But that template really becomes unbeatable with the third movie, 1964's Goldfinger. Writing about Bond's influence on the spy genre, Matt Blake and David Deal of the Eurospy Guide contend that Goldfinger was the early Bond that seemed to strike a chord with filmmakers across Europe. From this film, they drew their markers, pitting their debonair heroes against demented criminal masterminds, complete with unlikely schemes for world domination and outrageously equipped henchmen. The Eurospy craze begins almost immediately. This truly international genre parroted and parodied Bond in equal measure. Most of these movies are really forgotten now, at least by English-speaking audiences, but the genre's influence endures via the Austin Powers series, which liberally references the 60s exploits of Bond, James Coburn's Derek Flint, and Michael Caine's Harry Palmer, a more low-key character designed as a counterpoint to Bond's flashiness. But it's this flashiness that makes Bond such a cultural powerhouse. By blending the excesses of the era with the shadow of a very real and constant threat of Cold War escalation, Bond is able to tap into contemporary audiences' anxieties while also providing escape from them. Even if Bond isn't explicitly fighting Russians, the real world is always hanging over his adventures, giving even the silliest of these plots the faintest whiff of social and political import. Every other spy or action movie made during this period is a supporting player to James Bond. He is a global phenomenon. He is a trendsetter. He is the 60s. But by 1969, Bond is having to do some reinvention, and on multiple fronts. While not a complete unknown at the time he took the role, Sean Connery was almost instantly catapulted to superstardom with Dr. No. Bond mania and the physical nature of the role takes its toll on Connery. He's weighing his options as early as the fourth movie, Thunderball. And what's more, he's signed on for multiple movies. That's how these Bond contracts work. You don't sign on for one. During production of the fifth movie, You Only Live Twice, the filmmakers actually had to hire extra security due to Connery's being swarmed by local reporters and onlookers. It's during this shoot that Sean Connery announces it will be his last outing as Bond. Without Connery, Broccoli and Saltzman find themselves in the unenviable position of having to recast the most famous movie character in the world. Their search ends when they sign Australian model and first-time actor George Lazenby. His first outing as Bond will be 1969's On Her Majesty's Secret Service, based on Ian Fleming's 11th Bond book. This will be a true test as to whether the character can survive without the movie star who made him famous. The sixth movie continues the Spectre storyline from the previous films, with Telly Savalas replacing Donald Pleasance as Ernst Stavro Blofeld. However, the real story here is Tracy, played by Diana Rigg, the legendary British actress whose work you need to see more of, especially if you only know her from her work on Game of Thrones. She's just one of several reasons that On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a damn near masterpiece. It's a bit more modern in its filmmaking techniques, with more jagged, postmodern editing and ambitious set pieces, while also investing in Bond's emotional life like never before. And Lazenby doesn't get enough credit for being a first-time actor taking on such an iconic character. His weaknesses in the role actually become his strength, weirdly. His inexperience makes Bond a little messy and, in a way, a little more brutal when he does invoke his license to kill. His performance also makes it easier to buy that he's finally met the woman of his dreams. And I'll leave it at that. As much as I wonder what Connery would have brought to this more emotionally resonant Bond, I don't know if it would have been better. Given his work in Diamonds Are Forever, which we'll get to in just a second, I'm not sure he would have been able to put aside his boredom with the role to do it justice. Lazenby's run is short-lived. His arrogance and his demands for more money don't endear him to the producers or his co-star.
Really quite good, wasn't he? And attractive and sexy and all those things. Just difficult off stage. He kind of thought he was a film star immediately and started throwing his weight around.
I can see how much growing up I needed to do before I did that role.
He makes a rogue announcement that he will not return for another film, making him the first and only one-and-done James Bond. Lazenby later expressed some regret, but in 1969, he is one of Bond's doubters. The mod fashion and swinging 60s has given way to a new, gritty and naturalistic kind of movie.
We want to be free. We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
Yeah! Easy Rider. It's the story of a man who went looking for America and couldn't find it anywhere.
The same year, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is released. To modest reviews and modest box office, the independently made road movie Easy Rider hits theaters and instantly scares the shit out of everyone in the film industry old enough to remember the advent of sound. Easy Rider was made, mostly, by Hollywood outsiders and wayward Nepo babies, launching the careers of Dennis Hopper, Peter Fonda, and Jack Nicholson. Most of all, it effectively mainstreamed the anti-establishment feeling among America's disillusioned youth. Law and order is suddenly a very fraught subject at the movies.
You're supposed to be protecting them from us, and they protecting us from you. That don't make sense, do it?
Throughout the 60s, Bond's only competition were tuxedo-wearing, libido-raging knockoffs.
And here he is, our man Flint.
But going into the 70s, he has competition on both ends of the political spectrum. He has the left-wing, authority-defying, anti-establishment hippies who just
want to get loaded. Yeah!
And then you have the old guard, the crooked cops who certainly act like they have licenses to kill.
And we'll blow your head clean off.
And somehow, both of these figures are anti-heroes. Not even a decade in, and Bond and all his uncomplicated loyalty to Queen and country and detached efficiency to the realities of murdering in the government's name is becoming outmoded.
I misjudged you. You are just a stupid policeman.
This is about the time that Broccoli and Saltzman entertained the idea that James Bond should be more hip, more overtly dangerous, and more accessible to a wider audience. More American. They come dangerously close to casting John Gavin, an actor whom Alfred Hitchcock once referred to as the Stiff. Ronald Reagan later appointed him ambassador to Mexico, keeping him off our screens for good. One of the few solids Reagan ever did us. More than anything else, it's global matters that will set the series adrift in this next decade. The 70s are a relatively peaceful decade in the ongoing Cold War. The early 70s sees a widespread acceptance of détente, a sort of tentative peace between the nations. After all, America's still busy losing its ass in Vietnam, Russia is losing its ass keeping up with the arms race, and the UK and their allies want to broker peace because they don't have the benefit of being an ocean away from the Soviets. And everyone has nukes now. So there's a sense that maybe it's time to calm down a little, save up some money, build some national morale, and then let's, circle back on this whole war thing in a few years when we're all in a better place. This doesn't mean the Cold War is over by any means. It just means we're going to keep fighting proxy wars and pretend we're not fighting each other. For the kids' sake. This also means that the Bond movies will have to take it easy on the Russians even more than they did before. But that's great news, right? Not only are we giving peace a chance, but now James Bond is free to explore new narrative possibilities. How will he adapt to this easing of tensions that used to give the franchise a sort of unspoken social significance? What kind of aesthetic and genre innovations will James Bond pioneer in this new decade? Well,
You got a honky on your tail.
Instead of immediately embracing the changing times, the first James Bond movie of the 1970s promised to be a bit more straightforward, at least on paper. And to do that, they'll make as few changes to the team behind the scenes as possible. Goldfinger director Guy Hamilton will return to helm Diamonds Are Forever. Production designer Ken Adam will return to handle sets. Composer John Barry's jazz-infused horns will provide the score once again. Title designer Morris Bender will embrace the diamond motif of the title against Shirley Bassey's brassy belt on the title song. The one major change they make is in the writing. Instead of going with an American star, they went with an American writer.
I want him to be young. I'd like him to be American.
So you're saying there's a chance? Did I mention it's a master's degree? They engage screenwriter Tom Mankiewicz, son of All About Eve writer-director Joseph L. Mankiewicz. I think Mankiewicz's contributions are under-discussed when it comes to Bond. Mankiewicz will work, credited or not, on every Bond movie made in the 70s. There are things that occur in these movies, just at the script level, that certainly set a new tone.
Secret agent!
To buy themselves some more time in their search to find the perfect replacement for Sean Connery, the producers cast Sean Connery. They make the actor an offer he can't refuse. a hefty $1 million, which he then donates to a fund to help homegrown Scottish artists, and then a 2-picture deal with series distributor United Artists. I think the producers are really burned by the experience with George Lazenby, because they'll repeat this cycle several times over the next few decades. An actor wants to leave the role, they offer him more money to stay until they can find the right replacement. Then soon, the actor is in the role longer than anyone ever wanted him to be, and the next actor is a little older than he should be to hold the role for a long time, and then he's stuck with the responsibility of reestablishing the franchise's integrity. Diamonds Are Forever is the 4th Ian Fleming novel. However, Mankiewicz' screenplay only keeps a few names and certain components of the plot. In the film, M sends James Bond to investigate a diamond smuggling pipeline with links in South Africa, Amsterdam, and finally Las Vegas. Various criminals and diamond smugglers involved in this operation are being eliminated. Bond assumes the identity of a career criminal to investigate. In Amsterdam, he makes contact with the streetwise Tiffany Case, a wig-switching diamond smuggler who will unknowingly help him locate the head of the crime syndicate behind these disappearing diamonds. Jill St. John plays Tiffany, and this woman had a lasting impact on me. Not in the way my father probably hoped, but
I approve.
I don't dress for the hired help.
I have a friend named Felix who can fix anything.
Is he married?
by the end, this character really runs its course. She goes from this ball-busting diamond smuggler who can handle herself to this jiggling, bikini-clad moron outsmarted by a machine gun. It's one of the more frustrating character arcs for an otherwise promising Bond heroine. In Las Vegas, Bond discovers that his arch-nemesis, Ernst Stavro Blofeld, is behind the whole plot. Blofeld's aim isn't to steal these diamonds, that would be quaint. He's actually stolen the identity of Willard White, a Texan oil casino and aerospace magnate, and is using his massive empire as a cover for his plan. You see, he's placed these diamonds in a diamond-encrusted satellite and sent it into space. Oh yeah, there's more. The satellite also has a laser. With this laser, Blofeld destroys the nuclear sites of 3 global superpowers, the US, Russia, and China. He then essentially threatens to destroy the rest of their nuclear artillery unless they pay him.
An international auction with nuclear supremacy going to the highest bidder.
Blofeld will then use his big, throbbing diamond laser to destroy the artilleries of the losers.
Why don't you get some Jimmy Dean sausage?
Jimmy Dean, the sausage man, is genuinely funny as Willard White. He's this Howard Hughes-inspired recluse who seems completely oblivious to the fact that Blofeld has stolen his identity and his entire empire right out from under his patent leather boots.
Baja!
Baja! Despite sense prevailing and them not casting an American as Bond, the Vegas location really does cover Diamonds Are Forever in a film of distinctively American vulgarity. In this one, Bond trades the very posh, exclusive, smoke-filled, and low-key casinos we're used to seeing for Circus. Adding to the vulgar flamboyance is Blofeld's underexplained subplot of cloning himself multiple times.
Right idea, Mr. Bond.
But wrong pussy.
Not that I need an explanation for it, I think it's fabulous. Diamonds Are Forever is the bitchiest Bond movie. This Blofeld is a bitch.
Great powers flexing their military muscles like so many impotent beach boys.
Played by Charles Gray, future star of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, he is a walking camp object. This is a Blofeld who gets into drag for, again, no real textually supported reason. He just wants to feel pretty while he strokes his pussy. Even Bond and M are trading quips like two old queens. It's like an episode of Vicious in there.
Refreshing to hear there's one subject you're not an expert on.
I'm going to so enjoy unplugging you.
It's fitting that Diamonds Are Forever is set mostly in casinos, because this is also the first Bond film that features a pair of queens.
I'm Mr. Wind. This is Mr. Kidd.
Oh, I see.
Although From Russia with Love's Rosa Klebb is canonically lesbian in the novel, Lotte Lenya can only go so far with the sapphic overtones given the constraints of early 60s censorship. Nearly a decade later, Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd can go a little further. Smarmy sociopaths Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd are a chilling pair. Played by Bruce Glover, father of Crispin, and Putter Smith, they're not exactly our best early case for gay marriage, but they're certainly notable.
But he's mine. He's mine.
He's my toy. Jealousy came up because I had, in fact, the sense of Putter being my toy.
Ooh, there ain't no other way. As a homosexual,
I am one myself.
It's not offensive if I say this, but I did misremember them as skipping away after they committed their first murder. Those are the levels of subtlety we're playing with here. In the end, Connery's Bond sets them straight, so to speak. He sets Mr. Kidd on fire, which is respectable enough, and then he does this to Mr. Wint. Is it homophobia or is it camp? Well, I think the answer is both. Now, based on everything I've said up to now, you may think that I don't like this movie. And what would make you think that? Diamonds Are Forever is a top 10 Bond movie. Please tell me why I'm wrong in the comments. I could use the engagement. I truly admire this movie's commitment to the absurd. And it's so absurd. I could do 10 minutes on Bambi and Thumper alone, but this is already going to be long enough. I mean, this is one of the best Bonds. And you have to have a real camp sensibility and bad taste to appreciate it. And some of us are just born with it. And for the 1000th goddamn time, campy does not mean bad. Now, I have been a fan of this franchise, movies, books, video games, and all, since I was a kid. Honestly, that's probably the best time to become a Bond fan. The barrier of entry just gets higher the more you're exposed to reality. I think Bond fans are generally kind of confused by how the charms of the 60s movies are lost on people who didn't grow up with them. These movies are generally exciting, entertaining, and ambitious, and like many problematic cultural objects, I think the space they occupy in pop culture makes them worthy of our attention, interest, and scholarship. But when it comes to Bond, I always subscribe to a pretty generous camp lens, and that includes the supposedly unimpeachable Sean Connery movies. Camp is a word usually lobbed as an insult at Roger Moore's more ironic and outwardly comedic Bond of the 70s and early 80s. Connery plays the character pretty straight. Even when he tosses off a one-liner, there's a brutality to him that isn't meant to be funny. Like his luxury sports cars, his tailored suits, his duty to Queen and Country, it's frankly a little excessive. And what is camp, if not excess taken seriously? I think being a gay Bond fan means I'm a distance removed. Like, I don't find Bond aspirational. So Connery's retrograde misogyny, the early movies' batshit insane exoticism, the dated markers of luxury, these are all so cartoonish that if I took them seriously, I wouldn't enjoy these movies at all. But camp is in the eye of the beholder. And with Bond, the mileage always varies. And so does the quality. Diamonds Are Forever gets knocked for not taking Bond seriously enough, and that's also true of Connery's performance. And yeah, he's phoning it in, but you can do that when you have this much charisma. He makes a live rat seem like a credible scene partner. Every part of his performance screams that he is over this. And somehow it's kind of delightful. As much as I love Diamonds Are Forever and its camp delights, it is different. It makes a ton of money, certainly more than On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is arguably the better film. Though they ask him to stay again, Connery tells Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman that he's not doing this again. At least not for them.
Sean Connery is James Bond. Never say never again.
But that's a topic for another video. With a strict release date of summer 1973, the producers will finally pull the trigger on a permanent replacement for Connery. In the spirit of a new Bond actor, they also seem poised to finally embrace the post-détente cinematic world. Live and Let Die will put Bond in a grittier, more earthbound story. This will be a James Bond for the 70s. With Connery gone for good, Broccoli and Saltzman move on to their next Bond star, Roger Moore. Moore was already a household name from his starring role on The Saint. Through his role as Simon Templar, audiences first got to know that winking, gentlemanly humor that typifies Moore's Bond. On August 1st, 1972, Moore publicly accepted the role of James Bond at a press conference at London's famous Dorchester Hotel. As any Bond fan could tell you, Roger Moore's Bond definitely feels different. James Chapman succinctly describes the difference between Sean Connery and Roger Moore. Moore's forte was like comedy, and his style of performance was more geared towards innuendo and self-mockery than Connery's had been. Both could deliver the Bond one-liners with aplomb, but whereas Connery's had a sardonic wit, Moore's humor was broader and delivered with an even greater wink at the audience. Roger Moore himself described his approach thus: "I think the difference between us is that Sean is a killer, and I'm a lover." Yeah, that tracks. Roger Moore still holds the record for Bond actor with the most scenes played in a horizontal position. Unlike the last movie, Broccoli and Saltzman decide to embrace change. They make some major swaps in key roles behind the scenes. One of the most obvious changes is the music. Paul McCartney and Wings sing the title song, which is still beloved to this day, although I think Fergie may have performed the definitive version. No, it's a really good song, although I'm personally cooler on it than most people, but it's good. Longtime Bond composer John Barry is sidelined for frequent Beatles collaborator George Martin. Where John Barry's scores were bombastic with an elegant, jazzy brass sound, Martin's funk and soul-inspired score is meant to reflect the period and the genre from which the movie is borrowing its overall feel.
Superfly, yeah. Superfly.
My name's Carter.
In the early 70s, blaxploitation was intensely popular. To their credit, independent filmmakers saw the need for movies geared toward black audiences. Actually, let's be clear, they saw how much money mainstream Hollywood was leaving on the table by not catering to black audiences. Although black artists were rarely writing and directing these movies, with some notable exceptions, the blaxploitation genre existed in opposition to mainstream movies that largely neglected black characters and moviegoers. Heroes and heroines like Shaft, Foxy Brown, Cleopatra Jones, and Sweet Sweetback get to be the focus of these films, creating new, if often short-lived, folk heroes for an underserved cinema-going audience. In his book Black Caesars and Foxy Cleopatras, A History of Blaxploitation Cinema, Odie Henderson writes, "For better or for worse, black people were front and center in blaxploitation, playing heroes and starring in their own tales. Beats the hell out of cameoing as Thug Number 3 on an episode of TV's Beretta, or potentially getting one's face blown off by Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry because he had forgotten how many bullets he fired from his .44 Magnum. The box office for these movies is admirable, especially when you consider their minuscule budgets. These are exploitation movies, after all, quick and dirty productions by industry outsiders where artistic aims take a backseat to commercial ones. That doesn't mean they're not artful, but they're certainly not taken seriously as art, at least at the time. The genre's box office success is enough to convince Cubby Broccoli, Harry Saltzman, and screenwriter Tom Mankiewicz that blaxploitation might be the perfect vehicle to reestablish James Bond's relevance. In Live and Let Die, 007 investigates the murders of 3 agents, all of which are traced back to a feared New York-based drug lord named Mr. Big. Bond soon discovers that Mr. Big is actually the alter ego of Dr. Kananga, a shady Caribbean politician who controls the citizens of a small island nation through voodoo and religious hysteria. But this is all a smokescreen for Kananga's true aim. With his stockpile of heroin, Kananga is hoping to exacerbate the drug problem in America by essentially giving his supply away for free. Access to free heroin will then send its use sky high, creating widespread dependency and forcing his competitors out of the drug trade entirely. Then, he'll make a fortune jacking up the prices of his previously free drugs and selling them at punishing prices to his now desperate and dependent customer base. This evil plot is one of the more grounded ones in the series, especially when you consider some of the high-concept shit Blofeld was up to.
Total infertility.
Nuclear supremacy going to the highest bidder.
You can watch it all on TV.
Kananga is strictly business. He doesn't want to cause World War III. No, he's just trying to survive in this economy.
I am in Brooklyn, trying to survive in this economy, working.
The incredible character actor Yaphet Kotto, who you might know from Alien, had just wrapped filming Across 110th Street when he took on the role of Mr. Big and Dr. Kananga. He plays the dual role with a menacing charisma that really feels dynamic against Moore's stiff British coolness. The fact that his performance is not as strong when he's playing Mr. Big has a lot more to do with the writing than with him. Jane Seymour plays the heroine, Solitaire. Solitaire is a tarot reader with a genuine gift for second sight, whose powers Kananga relies on and feels ownership over. Those psychic abilities are conditional. To be of any use to Kananga, she must remain a virgin, which, of course, James Bond can only see as a challenge. Watching it this last time, I was also struck by how Jane Seymour, bless her, is really trying to have a point of view on a character who is devoid of one. You'll hear me say this a lot, especially about the women in these movies, but it's not her fault. She's innocent. Blame the writer. Blame the director. Originally, they wanted Diana Ross for this role. This would have been right as she was blowing up as a movie star, having recently earned an Oscar nod for playing Billie Holiday in Lady Sings the Blues. It also would have been the first time we saw Bond bed a black woman on screen. This distinction belongs instead to Gloria Hendry. Hendry plays Rosie Carver, a hapless, double-crossing CIA agent who is utterly useless.
I'm going to be completely useless to you.
This is a CIA agent who can't work a gun.
I could have shot you.
You might have even killed me if you'd taken off this engine.
She's supposed to be a double agent. I don't even think she's a single agent. That's fine. This character is such an insult to Gloria Hendry and to us, frankly. Now, this is the first black woman with any substantive role in a Bond movie, and this is what we get?
Oh, I should have never gotten into any of this.
Oh, sure we'd be able to lick you into shape.
Odie Henderson actually likens Rosie Carver to Prissy from Gone with the Wind. Once again, it's not her fault. She's innocent. Blame the writer. Blame the director. Rosie is representative of a larger problem in this movie. Racism isn't just Bond sin. You could pluck any major movie ever made in the history of always and find racism, but you can't eat an elephant whole or whatever the saying is, and this video is about James Bond. Despite having what I would guess is the largest number of black actors in any Bond ensemble, most of the black characters are villains or accomplices to the villains. Every single black person in either Harlem or New Orleans seems to be on this drug dealer's payroll. And the movie even acknowledges this. They play on it with a cute little fake out involving a CIA agent who ends up being on Bond's side.
Can't miss it. It's like following a cue ball.
To his credit, I suppose, screenwriter Tom Mankiewicz knows this is all a potentially controversial move. It doesn't stop him, but he considers it.
I wanted to do Live and Let Die because I thought it had more of an edge to it. Because all the villains were black, and I knew it was a very chancy thing because we were making it in the time of the Black Panthers. We were making it in the time of really a black revolution.
There's no getting around the fact that these movies are frequently racist and misogynistic. Live and Let Die isn't the first time Bond has trafficked in the mistreatment of people of color. In a lot of ways, it's exactly what you might expect from a series that's the brainchild of a mid-century British novelist whose project mythologizes the British Empire. And yes, I've read the novels. They're so much worse. Especially Live and Let Die. No amount of revising can hide that book's nefarious racism. Oh, and then there's the voodoo, which I don't even know where to begin with that. In fact, I'm going to err on the side of sense and say not for me to parse. But it feels weird. Feels weird, to put it mildly. Live and Let Die is constantly acknowledging Bond's outsider status in ways we've never seen. We're used to seeing him as an easy fit anywhere. He has to be good at his job. Even outside of exclusive casinos and sports clubs, Bond has been a natural in settings as far-flung as a Romani encampment outside Istanbul and a ninja training ground in the middle of rural Japan. But in Harlem, he's never been treated more like an unwelcome outsider.
You have found yourself.
Live and Let Die is definitely a novelty within the series. It attempts to marry the high-flying adventures of James Bond with the gritty realism and street-level crime that became popular in movies of the 70s. And the results are confused. To this point, it's the biggest swing the franchise takes in terms of what subgenre conventions it wants to play with. But don't worry, there's more where that came from. Even in the 70s, critics, academics, and audiences were skeptical of blaxploitation's ability to challenge or push racial equality in the film industry. However, all of that is completely tangential to this conversation because Live and Let Die is not blaxploitation. It's just Bond playing dress-up. It's an ill-fitting tux he needs to send back to the tailor. I don't think my problems with it are just me being, too woke, because there are entire swaths of James Bond fans who become feral when you have the audacity to tarnish their beloved franchise with politics. And if I've done my job in this video so far, the irony of that should be self-evident. In his entire chapter on Live and Let Die, Henderson concludes, "It's safe to say Guy Hamilton was no Jack Hill, director of Coffee and Foxy Brown, and that screenwriter Mankiewicz, Cubby Broccoli, and everyone else behind the camera had no clue about what made blaxploitation films click. What I find interesting about Live and Let Die and its attempt to emulate blaxploitation is its obvious desperation to stay relevant without having any actual interest in the phenomenon it's trying to rip off. The black characters in the movie are never centered. They're cannon fodder for Bond to shoot his way through. Now that's par for the course for this series, no matter what race the villains are. The James Bond template necessitates meat shields. But having a white man blasting away black villains while the movie wears the costume of a genre specifically created to strike back at the dehumanization of an entire group of people and make money, it kind of reads like you're just dehumanizing an entire group of people. To me, at least. And again, I'm not even touching the voodoo. Live and Let Die isn't blaxploitation any more than it is exploitation. When movies in this era, with the budgets and craftspeople and cachet that Live and Let Die has, try to emulate these aesthetics, it feels all the more disingenuous to me. Because even when they're not straining for cultural importance, the James Bond movies are far too opulent, sleek, and ingrained in the mainstream movie-making apparatus to ever be credibly considered exploitation in any form. So all that's left is pale imitation. And that's what this is. Instead of setting the standard by which all other action films will be judged, as they had in the decade previous, they simply tried to plug James Bond into a pre-existing fad that he had no business being in and crossed their fingers.
Hey man, for $20, I'll take you to a Ku Klux Klan cookout.
I think what's really frustrating about it is that there is an interesting story here. The idea of a relentlessly nefarious capitalist purposefully pumping drugs into an urban center and then hiking up the prices is ripe for social commentary. This is the era of Nixon's war on drugs rhetoric that'll be taken up again in the conservative 80s. At the end of the day, though, Kananga's is just another harebrained scheme, easily foiled by timed minds, gadgetry, and that good old-fashioned British exceptionalism. The presence of Bond just removes any possibility of giving this movie a real edge. And I'll be honest, if Live and Let Die were better written or even a bit more exciting, I think I might be a little kinder to it. But it's lower mid-tier Bond to me. Out of 25 movies, I think I'd rank it somewhere like 18 or 19. But what do I know? I love Diamonds Are Forever. Live and Let Die got a pretty cool reception from the critics. The general consensus seems to be that it's fine. More notable is the prevailing opinion that Moore should be a good Bond. And maybe he could be someday. But inevitably, the reviews focus on what the critics miss about Connery's interpretation of the role. I think it's also worth noting that even his first time out, Moore's glib one-liners are already wearing thin on a lot of people. It's going to be a long 12 years for them.
Keeping the British hand up, sir.
Richard Maybaum, who was a screenwriter on many of the early Bond adventures, was especially critical in the March 1983 issue of Starlog magazine, calling Live and Let Die a lousy cooking dope somewhere in the jungle movie, and reasoned to process drugs in the middle of a jungle is not a Bond caper. Writing for Time magazine, Richard Schickel actually took issue with Live and Let Die's racism, calling Moore's performance as Bond lacking in humanity and criticized the film for an overall lack of tension. This most pinpoint accurate observation identifies the very thing that compelled me to make this video in the first place. Schickel writes, Live and Let Die is the most vulgar addition to a series that has long since outlived its brief historical moment, if not, alas, its profitability. If the cultural window that made James Bond a phenomenon is over, movie audiences don't seem to know or care because Live and Let Die makes the list of the biggest worldwide hits of 1973, joining blockbusters like The Exorcist, The Sting, and the martial arts classic Enter the Dragon. Released at the height of Bruce Lee's fame, Enter the Dragon features Lee as a martial arts instructor at the famed Shaolin Temple, who becomes embroiled in an international plot involving underground criminals. A joint project between the United States and Hong Kong, the film sees Lee's character teaming up with an African-American activist and, significantly, a British agent. If genre fusion is the future of the spy thriller, Enter the Dragon is the best template for success. It's made for less than $1 million, a pittance compared to what it makes at the international box office. Now, Lee would pass away at the age of 32 before Enter the Dragon is released, but the film only helps to bring him, martial arts, and the Hong Kong film industry to the attention of markets who previously neglected them. In 1973, I assume the James Bond team is watching this with keen interest. It's the only explanation for some of the things that occur in The Man with the Golden Gun. It's pretty widely believed that The Man with the Golden Gun is the weakest of Ian Fleming's original novels. Only half finished when he died in 1964, it focuses on a James Bond who has been broken down and recently deprogrammed out of brainwashing by the Russians. He becomes entangled with a sleazy gangster operating out of Jamaica. It's a sort of last chance mission before he's essentially retired by the Secret Service. The film retains virtually none of this story, so... okay. But you can forget all that because the film retains virtually none of this. You can forget all that because the film virtually... Fuck. Plans to adapt this novel were on the docket as early as 1967. According to the making-of documentary Inside the Man with the Golden Gun, I might have gone with a different title. It was intended to be Roger Moore's debut after Connery left the role post You Only Live Twice. They relocated the book's action from Jamaica to Cambodia, presumably because Bond had already been to Jamaica in Dr. No. But Cambodia became impossible when a revolution broke out there.
There's one they were going to do, and they were going to shoot in Cambodia.
Cambodia was considered, and of course we all know what happened there.
The filmmakers switched gears, casting George Lazenby and making On Her Majesty's Secret Service in Switzerland and Portugal instead. The success of imported martial arts movies, particularly Enter the Dragon, convinced them to go ahead with a story set in Asia, in places like Beirut, Macau, and most notably, Thailand. While the ninth Bond adventure does feature martial arts, I think it would be a mistake to only look at it through that lens. The filmmakers are even less interested in understanding the martial arts subgenre than they were blaxploitation. Instead, they've dropped 007 in the middle of a weird mix of kung fu movie, western, and genuinely terrible comedy. It's a hot pot of 70s nonsense. Although it might pass for one of the better episodes of Fantasy Island. Bond is summoned to M's office when a golden bullet engraved with 007 arrives at MI6 headquarters. Clearly, it's a message. The golden bullet is the calling card of a world-class freelance assassin named Francisco Scaramanga. Bond is sent out to find Scaramanga before Scaramanga can find him. Although, he presumably knows where Bond works. Like, why not just wait outside MI6 and blow him away? But I always try to meet a movie where it is, even if it's in the dumpster. Legendary actor Christopher Lee plays the title villain, a world-class assassin with, and this is important, 3 nipples, who carries a distinctive gun and bullets forged from gold. He spends most of his time on a beautiful island in Phuket, Thailand. He has an assistant named Knick Knack who traps opponents for him to hunt down in his bizarre funhouse. It's like the most dangerous game set inside Disney's Great Movie Ride. R.I.P. Although I do love that he has a henchman on hand to periodically torture him. It's kind of kinky. I mean, if this had come out when fanfics were big, the Knick Knack Scaramanga fix would have had the girl steamed up.
To us.
The movie suggests a potentially interesting dichotomy in Bond and Scaramanga. Both are elite killers. Are they really so different because James Bond does it for Queen and Country and Scaramanga just loves killing people? But that's also just another underbaked component of the screenplay, which, if it's not clear yet, is absolute dog shit. Christopher Lee is genius casting for a Bond villain, but he's wasted here. The way Francisco Scaramanga is written doesn't really sell him as a believable match for 007. On paper, the plot is almost Western-like. It even ends with a duel. And it would be so much better if Scaramanga were an actual threat to 007 instead of just a dispensable villain. Along the way, though, Bond winds up using his martial arts training to play grab ass with some sumo wrestlers and get the better of some elite karate students, one of whom is this absolute stud. This is Kula. He's a black belt, and he's my husband now. Swedish actress Britt Ekland plays Mary Goodnight, one of the most inept characters in any of these movies, in any movie actually, period. She is so useless. It's actually a wonder she doesn't accidentally step into the line of fire like Natalia in GoldenEye 64. And it's hard, because it would be easy to blame Britt Ekland, but if the great Christopher Lee himself couldn't make Scaramanga interesting, there was no hope for anyone here. There's a really tiresome and literal-minded fan theory about the Bond series that suggests that every new James Bond actor is a different Agent 007 using the same government-issued name and number. I never gave that much credence until I watched The Man with the Golden Gun again. As Bond's long-suffering boss, Bernard Lee at least seemed to have a grudging respect for Bond when Connery played him. I genuinely think he wants Roger Moore dead.
I almost wish that Scaramanga had a contract on you.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just...
Those of you who are familiar with these films will note that I have not spoken at all about Sheriff J.W. Pepper. Sheriff J.W. Pepper is... I'm just going to rewrite it really quick. Sheriff J.W. Pepper is the racist Southern sheriff they decided to write into both Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun.
Nobody cuts and runs on Sheriff J.W. Pepper.
Up to now, I haven't said anything about him, and I expect you to congratulate me for my restraint, because what I have to say about Sheriff J.W. Pepper would violate several of YouTube's terms of service. So instead of me having to talk about him at length, here is a mercifully short montage of his greatest hits.
Secret agent? If you got your little pointy heads out of them pajamas, I'm gonna get the FBI on your ass, the CIA. God damn it, I'm gonna get Henry Kissinger.
Tom Mankiewicz, you will pay for your crimes. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. There are things to love about The Man with the Golden Gun. It's always fun to see Christopher Lee. It's great to see some stunning locations. It's impressive that Roger Moore makes such a convincing wax figure. But it's safe to say there's something missing from this movie. And that something is obviously Chula. It needs more Chula. In editing this segment, I can feel it becoming a list of complaints, and I'm sorry for that. It's so easy to point and laugh at the badness, but I didn't want that for you. I didn't want that for us. It's just so hard to engage with The Man with the Golden Gun as a work of art. I'd much rather be talking about how it emulates, however falsely, the martial arts movies of the period, but outside of a few nods in that direction, this movie can't even decide what it wants to be. Even its most impressive stunt is ruined by a choice so baffling you'd think that someone on the Bond team wanted it to fail. You know, at first glance, I should be glad that they didn't pull a Live and Let Die and just shove Bond into a phony kung fu movie, embroiling him in a culture and a cinematic movement they just didn't understand, but maybe they should have. It'd be a little easier to make sense of some of these choices. Unlike the other movies in the 70s run, I find it harder to explain why The Man with the Golden Gun is the way it is. Like, yeah, kung fu movies are a phenomenon, but I wouldn't call this a kung fu movie. Live and Let Die has some sauce. This is just a piss take. If you listen close, you can actually hear this franchise losing steam. Even if the reviews weren't stellar, Live and Let Die managed to outgross much better movies. No such luck for Golden Gun. It becomes the lowest grossing Bond movie up to that point. It wasn't a flop in the traditional sense, though. It made enough money to justify a sequel, but that's about it. But if this is what they think people want from a Bond movie, he's not going to last into the 80s. Clearly, something needs to change. And something does change, but not in the way they might have hoped. Things were becoming strained in the Broccoli-Saltzman partnership.
Harry had gotten himself into a terrible financial mess with the Swiss bank, and he had pledged his shares of the company's stock.
Saltzman's money troubles see his 50% stake in Danjaq, the company that holds the James Bond copyrights, and thus the ownership of the Bond series itself, in jeopardy. Saltzman is desperate. And he sells his share of Danjaq to United Artists, the series' longtime distributor.
Harry unfortunately lost his shares and therefore was out of the company.
Cubby became the de facto representative of the company.
Cubby Broccoli is now flying solo. And the next James Bond adventure has more riding on its success than ever. United Artists agrees to largely stay out of the way when it comes to making creative decisions about the series. However, their contract is tricky because it basically says that if Danjaq and Eon Productions don't deliver a Bond film every year and a half, they have the option to take full ownership. So with this hanging over his head, Cubby Broccoli and company begin work on Bond number 10. If The Spy Who Loved Me isn't necessarily the best of the Ian Fleming novels, it's certainly one of the most interesting. In it, James Bond happens upon a motel in the Adirondacks of upstate New York. There, he meets a troubled motel employee beset by a couple of mobsters looking to burn the place down for the insurance money. Fleming tells this story not from Bond's POV, but from the woman he romances. The me of the title is actually Vivian Michel. Vivian is a world-weary woman who spends the first third of the novel recounting her troubled romantic history. It's like a Bond novel set in Peyton Place.
Just saw a young fella and a girl swimming without a stitch on.
Where?
How Vivian winds up at this remote motel with two mobsters makes up the novel's midsection. Bond doesn't actually show up until the last third of the story, just in time to save the day. I actually remember liking this book, honestly. Although, knowing Fleming, I'm sure if I read it now, I'd probably be shocked and horrified by some of his insights about women. So Fleming's novel of The Spy Who Loved Me was not well received. This might explain why, when he sold Broccoli and Saltzman the film rights to the stories, he stipulated that only the title, The Spy Who Loved Me, could be used. To his credit, Fleming knew he had a banger with that one. The author was dead some 13 years by the time the movie was actually made, but a contract is a contract. And ultimately, it might have been a good thing. A seedy, intense James Bond neo-noir would have definitely been my shit. But in 1977, coming off the lowest grossing entry in the series so far, it would have been a huge risk that could have effectively tanked the series. The movie of The Spy Who Loved Me sets out to make a more traditional Bond adventure, only bigger, much, much bigger. The script will mostly follow the formula that the series carved out in the previous decade, with a few updates to keep the template fresh. Bringing Bond back to his roots presents a challenge, though. The plot of the original script involved the Spectre organization and Bond's old arch-nemesis, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. But the rights to those characters and that organization had since become the subject of a lengthy legal dispute that goes all the way back to Thunderball, if you can believe it. But that's a topic for another video that maybe I'll make someday. Broccoli and the movie's various screenwriters have to go back to the drawing board and come up with an original story featuring a villain who is just different enough from Blofeld to avoid a lawsuit. Karl Stromberg is an eccentric and cultured shipping magnate with a grandiose plan to nuke the entire planet and create a new race in his underwater lair. His home is a multi-legged, arachnoid submarine aptly called Atlantis. The interiors were so ambitious that Ken Adam actually consulted his collaborator from Dr. Strangelove and Barry Lyndon.
Ken Adam turns to legendary filmmaker Stanley Kubrick.
He said, I must be mad.
Very difficult set to light, not only because of the vastness, but because of all the shiny surfaces.
Kubrick's suggestions went uncredited, but his advice apparently helped a great deal. Karl Stromberg's small and merry band of henchmen includes Jaws, a towering villain with razor-sharp teeth played by Richard Kiel, who played a suspiciously similar character in Silver Streak the year before. I've never figured out what that was about. Sandor, played by Milton Reed, who's not very memorable outside of his death. And Naomi, a deadly, scantily clad helicopter pilot played by model and B-movie actress Caroline Munro. Bond is pulled into the story by the disappearance of two ballistic submarines belonging to the US and the UK. With their payload of nuclear missiles, Stromberg will destroy the entire planet and create a new society underwater. This time, Bond isn't working alone. The Spy Who Loved Me's masterstroke is in acknowledging two very real political movements that could dent James Bond's cultural relevance: détente and second wave feminism. In the pre-title sequence, we're introduced to a man and a woman in bed together. They're Russian. No, not Russian. Russian. We learn that one of them is Secret Agent XXX, but surprise, the woman turns out to be the secret agent.
A woman?
Barbara Bach plays Anya Amasova, Russia's own Agent XXX, the first woman we've ever seen who can pull rank on Bond, as it were. She is a match for him and his skills. The only thing separating them is gender and the Iron Curtain. Anya's lover, also a secret agent, has a mission of his own. In the midst of an ambush on the slopes of Austria, he is killed by an enemy agent. That agent, of course, is also Russian. Russian to get back to England, because it's James Bond! Bond's escape involves a very real jump from a massive cliff, only to be saved by a Union Jack parachute. This stunt actually rules. It may be the most impressive, most dangerous, and I know it was the most expensive in the series' history up to that point. After this, the credits begin. Carly Simon introduces one of the series' best and most famous title songs. Nobody Does It Better is the perfect sentiment for this Bond, because after that opening, you really believe it. 5 minutes in, and The Spy Who Loved Me already reminds you of all the things that made Bond great in the 60s. Agent 007 and Agent XXX are both assigned by their respective governments to find the 2 missing nuclear submarines and stop Stromberg before he can make his mad dream a reality.
Women drivers.
Quiet.
Throughout, Bond and Anya playfully outfox each other until it becomes imperative for them to cooperate.
Shaken, but not stirred.
This is the first Bond movie to really engage with the UK's relationship with the Soviet Union since the détente era began. In fact, détente is really what the movie ends up being about. Cooperation between the East and the West, that uneasy alliance between 2 global superpowers who can't totally trust each other yet. Even when, as in this case, they have a common goal, preventing the end of the world. The Spy Who Loved Me doesn't rewrite the existing template, it just gives it a refresh. After The Spy Who Loved Me, Bond heroines can't just be eye candy anymore. From this point on, they're eye candy with degrees. These women can be tough, and they have expertise in plot-relevant industries, making them a partner in Bond's missions and not just his reward for a job well done at the end of the movie. Now, were those characters always believable? And despite her own character's impact on the franchise, Barbara Bach didn't exactly walk away convinced of Bond's newfound feminism. The actress told People magazine in 1983 that, despite her own character's competence, that Bond was still a chauvinistic pig who uses girls to shield him against bullets. And she's not being hyperbolic, unfortunately. That actually happens to another female character in The Spy Who Loved Me. Despite that, though, the first half of this movie is pretty strong. You have all the makings of an enemies to lovers story that could have broad appeal. It isn't until halfway through that Anya finds out Bond is responsible for her lover's death. Like 007, the mission is Anya's priority. But once Stromberg is stopped, she promises she will get her revenge.
Then, when this mission is over, I will kill you.
And this is where the movie starts to lose me, because I never, for one moment, believe Anya's even gonna try to kill Bond. And of course, she does it. Save for a brief and cheap fake out at the end, it's a potentially rich storyline that just doesn't pay off. If Anya is Bond's equal, she has the power to be as dangerous as any villain he's ever faced. Maybe even more so, because she's not some renegade millionaire. She has an entire government's worth of resources and artillery and training behind her. But neither one is going to go against their orders.
The mission is over, Commander.
Once this mission is over, I should be wondering if this is going to end like When Harry Met Sally or Duel in the Sun. There's just a real streak of suspense missing in the second half that makes it even more of a bummer that Stromberg is just Diet Blofeld. But I can understand why The Spy Who Loved Me has the reputation it does. It's good, and it saved the series from the massive dip in quality and box office returns that was The Man with the Golden Gun. The Spy Who Loved Me thematizes the animosity between the UK and the Soviet Union, and then rewrites it as an enemies to lovers romance. All of its individual parts make it uniquely perfect for this specific moment in movie history. This is the year of sci-fi spectacles like Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Then in the opposite corner, you have witty rom-coms about opposites attracting, like Annie Hall and The Goodbye Girl. Then you have the seafaring adventure of The Deep, a movie that made a lot of money, despite the fact that no one has even thought about it since 1977. And if you love Saturday Night Fever, there's even a disco-infused score by Marvin Hamlish. Now, I love disco. It's one of the most unfairly maligned music genres possibly ever. But the fact that The Spy Who Loved Me is still so beloved by the masculine skewing fan base is probably all the proof you need that not even a little disco could ruin it. Even if Bond wasn't ahead of the trends this time, he wasn't chasing them. This time he was perfectly nestled in his current pop culture moment and in the geopolitical realities of the 70s Cold War. Spy is also, in my opinion, Roger Moore's best performance as Bond.
I need you.
So does England.
You can tell he's more comfortable in the role now, and more than that, the script matches his humor without sacrificing any of the character's dignity. Well, maybe that's debatable.
Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British end up, sir.
Back in the day, all the James Bond movies used to end with a credit that read, James Bond will return in, and then the title of the next movie. Now at the end of The Spy Who Loved Me, that title says, James Bond will return in For Your Eyes Only. But this is the year 1977, and something is about to happen in a galaxy far, far away. What was that? James? Once the Cold War-fueled space race fizzles out and the afterglow of the first moon landing subsides, space just doesn't have the same allure that it once did. You know, this is the 70s. The space age is out. Earth tones are in. Federal budget cutbacks end the Apollo program in the early 70s, leaving NASA to refocus their efforts on a new method of space exploration. The Space Shuttle program is just starting to reinvigorate public interest in the cosmos when science fiction goes mainstream in the late 70s. In May 1977, May 25th to be exact, not May the 4th, Star Wars drops like a cartoon anvil on an unsuspecting culture. Star Wars completely shifted the film industry. Against all odds, this movie is an immediate hit. Something about its combination of wide-eyed, family-friendly swashbuckling and high-stakes melodrama, its synthesis of epic stories that have been around since antiquity, the genuine innovations in technology, and just the good old-fashioned cinematic illusion that ticked all the boxes for the movie-going public. By the end of its first week in release, Time magazine is already calling it the movie of the year. Within 6 months, Star Wars is the highest-grossing American film ever made. And that home run continues into 1978 in international release and in domestic re-release because we just couldn't get enough of this fucking movie. In the middle of this, Hollywood is having an identity crisis of its own. The old studio system has collapsed. Young artistic voices and executives have emerged and created exciting new American classics. But by the end of the decade, the new Hollywood era that introduced us to the exciting, innovative talents of Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, and Steven Spielberg is already starting to show its cracks. Without the guidance and vision of bastards like Louis B. Mayer and Jack Warner, Hollywood studios are sinking money into auteur projects with diminishing returns. Coppola is teetering between genius and madness in the jungles of the Philippines, trying to finish Apocalypse Now. Scorsese is facing personal issues and a disastrous flop of a musical called New York, New York, a movie I personally love, but I wouldn't call it a masterpiece. Today, anyway. Spielberg is doing well, but he'll finish out the 70s with one of his biggest disappointments, an aimless World War II comedy called 1941. Most significant for the Bond series is that United Artists is about to face its own quagmire with Heaven's Gate. Director Michael Cimino's epic Western has been unfairly blamed for killing the new Hollywood all by itself. So when a major hit like Star Wars comes along, the studios just can't help themselves. They need surefire hits like they need a steady stream of coke. So they just go wild and start greenlighting everything space or space adjacent. Now they need a year or so to catch up. 1978 doesn't see quite as much of an uptick in sci-fi, but in the year 1979 alone, Star Wars distributor 20th Century Fox releases a bleak counterpoint with Ridley Scott's Alien. Disney releases a more straightforward ripoff with The Black Hole. Universal revives the Buck Rogers serial that inspired George Lucas in the first place. And Paramount finally feels confident enough to send Star Trek into theaters. That's to say nothing of all the indie-made and international cash-ins. So, Cubby Broccoli decides to throw Bond's reanimated corpse on the pile with Moonraker. Despite its name, Moonraker is actually one of the more grounded Bond novels. The third book published, Moonraker takes place entirely in England and puts Bond on the trail of Sir Hugo Drax, a multimillionaire who is supplying the British government with a new and deadly ICBM prototype. But Drax has plans to reverse Uno on them because he's going to aim that missile right at London. And if you like your spy thrillers with an extra dose of British paranoia, Drax is later revealed to be a Nazi in league with the Soviets. I guess they worked it out on the remix. When I first read Moonraker, two things stood out to me. It's very Hitchcockian, and it moves like a movie. Fleming actually salvaged the story from a screenplay idea, and it shows. It's lean, and it has a much more defined 3-act structure than his other books. But who gives a shit? We want to send Bond into space.
James Bond into space, out and beyond. 007.
Spectacular adventure in space. Moonraker. It's out of this world.
I hadn't seen Moonraker in years before I watched it for this video, and the whole time, I was overwhelmed by the feeling that no one in a position of power on this movie ever had the sense to say no. Continuing the series' new trend of dangerous pre-title stunts, stuntmen actually performed the mid-air fight that opens the film in the middle of a real freefall. And it doesn't feel half as worth it this time around. Moonraker begins with a fairly novel and spectacular sequence of a space shuttle being hijacked and stolen in mid-air. To investigate its disappearance, M sends Bond to meet the shuttle's manufacturer, Hugo Drax. It's clear almost immediately that Drax has stolen his own space shuttle, and Bond needs to find out why. Drax is a villain with expensive tastes. This is a man who has the capital, the hubris, and even worse, the tastelessness, to buy and export international landmarks and then have them rehoused in his backyard. He's a tacky, space-obsessed megalomaniac who speaks like some teenage boy's idea of an evil genius.
The human race will cease to exist.
In James Bond movies, men like this are considered national security threats and would never be given access to federal funding. Escapism. To his credit, Drax almost immediately tries to have James Bond killed. We have to give him some style points for trying to kill James Bond with a centrifuge. Love that. Although, it perhaps possibly calls a little too much attention to Roger Moore's advancing age.
A 70-year-old can take 3 Gs.
Drax is a massive improvement on Karl Stromberg, and that's more of a testament to French actor Michael Lonsdale because he manages to give the villain some dimension despite some truly heinous dialogue.
You appear with the tedious inevitability of an unloved season.
Tom Mankiewicz, you will pay for your crimes. Oh wait, Tom Mankiewicz didn't write this one. Christopher Wood, you will also pay for your crimes. Drax also scores some points for nastiness. He dispatches his assistant, Corinne Dufour, in one of the most brutal ways I've ever seen in this series. Knowing that she's given Bond some critical information, Drax fires her, without severance. At least, financially. Now, something similar also happens in The Spy Who Loved Me, but there's something just a touch removed from reality about dropping someone down an elevator trapdoor and letting her be eaten by the sharks you keep in your private aquarium. It's almost whimsical. Drax just fully sicks vicious dogs on this woman. Not quite so whimsical. And it really stands out in a Bond movie that I think, more than any other, is really trying to court a younger audience. But don't worry, Moonraker's commitment to the ludicrous prevails. One of Moonraker's major concessions to the kid-friendly response to Star Wars is its rewriting of a popular character.
The director's grandson saw The Spy Who Loved Me. He said, "Grandpa, I like Jaws."
We got an enormous amount of fan mail.
enormous number from children saying, why can't he be a goodie and not a baddie, you know?
Jaws was so beloved by children that the team behind Bond, though slightly puzzled, decided to make him a good guy this time around. After spending the first half trying to kill 007, a pretty young woman he meets in Rio inspires him to switch sides. I've always said that Jaws is the Chewbacca of the Bondverse. While on site at Drax Industries, Bond meets an astronaut, an undercover CIA agent named
Holly Goodhead. Holly Goodhead. Holly Goodhead.
What? Oh, grow up. Anyway, in Dr. Deep Throat, James Bond gets to act out another version of the push and pull romantic relationship he had with Anya Amasova last time around. In some ways, Moonraker does seem to have learned a lot from The Spy Who Loved Me. I'm just not sure they were all the right lessons. Despite some obvious differences in the particulars and the quality, Moonraker does closely follow the revised Bond template. You have Dr. Holly Throatgoat, who is presented as a capable and professional equal to Bond. You have a megalomaniacal villain who wants to destroy the world and watch it burn as he sits back in his expansive lair. Jaws is an obvious example, but the structure and the archetypes and the plot points match up pretty consistently. You can say a lot about Moonraker, I certainly do, but you can't say they were cheap. I mean, the location budget alone. It's as if MI6 had some travel miles that were about to expire. Bond spends the first 90 minutes of Moonraker chasing the thinnest of clues across the world like he's on The Amazing Race or something. He globetrots with such quickness that I often forgot why he was there in the first place. But nothing is more indulgent than its final location. Its final frontier, if you will. Hugo Drax's overall plan isn't just to steal his own space shuttle. From his massive space station lair, Drax is going to launch orbs loaded with a lethal nerve gas at the Earth, killing every last human being left behind. Then, with his specially selected group of Aryan passengers, he will create a master race in the cosmos. After he leaves them for dead, Bond and Dr. Sloppy Toppy chase Drax into outer space. What follows is so obnoxious that it actually makes me a little sad. James Bond and James Bond and what I understand to be the Special Forces astronaut unit of the CIA unleash a blaster fight on Drax and his minions in the middle of space. I think the saddest thing about it is that this is the whole reason the movie exists. You can't make the Bond in Space movie without a massive climax in space. Amid all the pew-pew laser stuff, I'm not going to say I lost my will to live because I'm trying to be less hyperbolic in the year 2026. But as I sat there, I had the distinct feeling that consciousness was a curse. The only thing it's missing is a little dash of pep. They should have brought him back for this one. I'd love to see them shoot that fucker into space. Hey, listen, if I can't write a Bond movie, let me pitch a spinoff. Get ready for Pepper, Bayou Patrol. 8 episodes, 75 minutes each, and nothing even happens until episode 4. You'll never guess his tragic backstory. Bond kills Hugo Drax with a handy little Q gadget, and then hops into a space shuttle equipped with lasers for some reason, and shoots down every little nerve gas-filled globe before it can enter Earth's atmosphere and cause widespread death. For the second time in a row, he celebrates a job well done by raw-dogging a woman in front of his boss.
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
I guess that means that Moonraker has 2 climaxes in space. So you could have colored me shocked when I logged onto God's internet and saw a small but concerning group of people who were trying to rehabilitate Moonraker's legacy. There was even one Redditor who said that Moonraker would rank among the best Bond movies if the last act didn't take place in space. Far be it from me to criticize anyone for having a contrarian opinion. God knows I partake. Diamonds Are Forever is a top 10 Bond movie. I think it just goes back to that whole exposure to reality thing I mentioned before. If you saw Moonraker when you were young enough for it to have nostalgic value now, I could see defending it, but that doesn't mean it's good. It's bad. Instead of following through on their original plan, Cubby Broccoli and the Bond team shoehorned Moonraker into the production schedule to cash in on the science fiction frenzy surrounding Star Wars. Space was the surefire movie trend to chase if you wanted to make big money in the year 1979. And Bond was a major franchise with enough goodwill and box office cachet to dwarf any other movie released that year. Moonraker should have been a huge success. So what happened? What went wrong?
I'm looking for Dr. Goodhead.
Oh, wait a minute.
The answer is nothing. Yeah, apparently sending James Bond into space was a great business decision, despite everything I've mentioned. Moonraker was a massive hit. It's still one of the highest grossing movies in the franchise's history.
James Bond into space, out and beyond.
The box office doesn't lie. Shoving Bond into a trendy genre actually worked this time. Maybe the answer really was going big and stretching the limits of believability, curving Agent 007 to fit the grooves of whatever blockbuster trend is hot at the moment. Maybe that's what any long-running series has to do in order to survive, especially when the context in which it was originally created changes so dramatically. Ironically, it took sending Bond to space to finally ground him in the post-détente world, a climate that's not solely defined by the Cold War. And then the Russians invaded Afghanistan. Now, you may not know this, but the Middle East is a particularly contentious region. Throughout the 1970s, Russia's longtime relationship with Afghanistan was deteriorating. A series of coups d'etats and rebellions led to the April Revolution of 1978, which installed a communist leadership. Soon, Russia became disenchanted with this leadership and invaded Afghanistan on Christmas Eve 1979. Some 6 months after Moonraker's release. It was a watershed event of the Cold War, marking the only time the Soviet Union invaded a country outside the Eastern Bloc, a strategic decision met by nearly worldwide condemnation. And this is a point in time when America is already on high alert. After all, this is over a month into the Iran hostage crisis. Now, Russia's excessive force in Afghanistan pisses off the US and the UK just on principle. It's seen as a major violation of the relative peace that's lasted a decade. The US boycotts the 1980 Moscow Olympics and pulls out of the Second SALT Treaty.
85% of the American people agree that it is vital for us to reach an agreement on nuclear arms. Both sides have immensely powerful strategic nuclear forces.
This invasion set the stage for an escalation of tensions not seen since the 60s. In Afghanistan, the Russians are strongly opposed by the Mujahideen, a faction of guerrilla fighters looking to oust the Russians and establish an Islamic fundamentalist government. The US and the UK will spend the 80s funding and arming the Mujahideen through a neighboring ally, Pakistan. The Soviet-Afghan War and the West's involvement in it will basically define international relations for, the next several decades. The conflict itself will last throughout the 80s. The Soviet Union will break up soon after their loss in Afghanistan, and meanwhile, Afghanistan will then devolve into civil war. Former Mujahideen fighter Osama bin Laden will form al-Qaeda, orchestrate one of the most devastating acts of mass violence in history, and usher in a new era of global terrorism that will make the 60s look like the Middle Ages. Another thing has happened at the start of the 80s. Both the US and the UK have swung conservative again. When they're not busy attacking minorities in public programs, President Reagan and Prime Minister Thatcher will oversee an era of aggression that will edge us closer to nuclear war more times than we should have been comfortable with, frankly. But I'm here to ask the really important questions. What does all this mean for James Bond? Conservative cost-cutting efficiency extended into the film industry, too. Bond's distributor, United Artists, was bleeding from its investment in Heaven's Gate, the 1980 Michael Cimino flop that put the period on the already failing auteur director haven that was the 70s. Cubby Broccoli and the Bond team swear that after Moonraker, Bond was always going to come back down to earth. Had the Cold War not escalated again, and had conservatism not won out, and had United Artists not bore the brunt of the new Hollywood crash, I wonder how long that belief would have held. Obviously, they wouldn't have kept Bond in space, one hopes, but the two Bond movies of the late 70s were ambitious and extravagant, going way over budget and lucking out by becoming box office supernovas. If spending more money made more money, I feel like this trend of going bigger would have just continued until it couldn't. By 1981, it couldn't. Bond productions had to become as austere as Her Majesty's government under Thatcher. But maybe there's something to that, because I think the 5 Bond movies produced in the 80s are miles better than most of what they produced in the 70s. Again, that's an opinion. If the success of Moonraker proves anything, it might be that I am personally out of step with what the general public wants from a Bond movie. I don't care how much money a movie or an artist make. Millions of people can have bad taste at the same time. That's how we get fascism. Bond number 12 not only returns to Earth, it also returns to Ian Fleming's original stories. Blending two tales from its namesake short story collection, For Your Eyes Only finds 007 trying to locate an essential piece of British gadgetry called the ATAC. You might know it by its Scottish name, the MacGuffin. He's in a race against time to recover it before it can be intercepted by a dangerous criminal mastermind who has plans to turn it over to the Russians for profit. It's a throwback to the plot of From Russia with Love, with a tragic revenge subplot thrown in. For Your Eyes Only once again finds Bond set firmly within a real-life global framework. As in early entries, he is a linchpin of UK, US, Russia relations, but not an instigator. Rather than paint the East with a broad brush, the series' villains are once again bad actors seeking to turn the heat up on the Cold War for their own gain. Octopussy,
what's wrong with Octopussy?
Has Bond taking down a Soviet general whose plans for total European domination are too cartoonish even for his comrades to get behind. In A View to a Kill, Christopher Walken plays an ex-KGB agent who's the genetically engineered result of a Nazi experiment. His sociopathy is way too much for even his former Russian handlers to, well, handle. Let's just say it would be beneficial for both countries if he were stopped. After Moore finally exited the role of the world's most suave and dangerous secret agent at the ripe old age of 57, Timothy Dalton's 2-film tenure reaffirmed Bond's place in the real world. In The Living Daylights, he literally assists the Afghan Mujahideen. It's amazing to think about how, as in all things, really, Bond's history is a series of repeating cycles. Like Détente in the 70s, the fall of the USSR in the 90s once again had the Bond series having to rewrite the rules of the espionage world for its new star, Pierce Brosnan.
Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War.
If only the rest of Brosnan's run were as good as GoldenEye. As with Moonraker and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the bizarre antics of Die Another Day are made even more ludicrous after the sobering international ramifications of world events. 9/11 and the post-war on terror 2000s shocked the character back into place when Daniel Craig takes over in 2006. In the 70s, you see the James Bond series experiencing its growing pains, losing its identity and having to find a new one, trying on subgenres like masks. Then, the 80s hit and the paradigm shifted. The world reverted back to a geopolitical framework not unlike the one that birthed Agent 007 in the first place. James Bond is a folk hero. He's more myth than man. He is given more substance, more significance, just by existing in times that mirror those in which he was created. Just as Robin Hood is a folk hero born out of the Crusades and the oppressive poverty and corruption of the Middle Ages, James Bond is a folk hero born out of post-war paranoia and the looming nuclear threat. Robin Hood and James Bond are not entirely context-dependent, but the stories hit a lot harder when their audience is going through it on a grand scale. A movie-going public is going to watch Bond very differently when mutually assured destruction is back in style. You know, like it was in the 60s or the 80s, or the present. This is the existential tension we bring into the movies with us. And then we get to release it because it sort of presents this idea that someone, somewhere has everything under control. You don't have to buy into patriotism or imperialism or anything else Bond implicitly or explicitly stands for to enjoy a story about someone doing their job and having a handle on the global threats that affect us all. Maybe the real-life danger just makes it all the more delicious. Maybe there is a James Bond out there, maybe several James Bonds, carrying out missions right under our noses, foiling evil plots that could potentially kill us that we'll never ever know about. Bond is a creature of conflict. His adventures hit hardest in a world that's going to hell and inching ever closer to nuclear annihilation. Which is good news for the next one. I don't even think it matters who plays James Bond next. With the state of the world right now, the next Bond movie is going to blow our tits clean off. That is, if the nukes don't blow them off first.